So if you actually watched part one, part three begins in the same place where I was flat on my back with dysentery in the public baths in San Cristobal de las Casas. And as soon as I recovered, I began hitchhiking north, um, and I started with the $3 in pesos. Um, I had really no other choice, but it was an interesting adventure that I value as the memory of an experience. I started out from San Cristobal, went down to the coast, and there's a Panamanian highway along there. The surprising thing about hitchhiking in Mexico is that people of a wider social range than in the States have a tendency to give you a ride. So upper crust people, there's more of them, and some of the lower down people also will pick up hitchhikers. So I had quite an array, and it wasn't difficult technically to keep hitching. The difficulty is when it's nightfall and you got to go somewhere. I found I could easily sleep on a sheet of plywood in a gas station or near a gas station comfortably. That comes from having alternated between the concrete and the hammock when I was in Palenque. Hammock one night, concrete the next night. And I could carefully nap on a rock. There was a waterfall called Mizolha, the Jaguar Waters. And it was a long, thin waterfall like Bridal Veil in Oregon, I think it is. And it was such a high fall that the air was loaded with droplets of water and good ions and whatnot. And I just laid out on a rock and bathed in that amazing water and air. So sleeping on a sheet of plywood was no problem. And the people in the gas station didn't bother me any, and I certainly wasn't bothering anybody. So that's the way it went, hop, skip, and a jump. Again, a matter of the vagaries of memory. That was in 1981, and it's now 2019, so it's quite a bit later, and what remains in memory is the more vivid experiences when I happen to be a little bit alert. So they recorded in memory. And in this case, I started out from San Cristobal, and I had that in memory, that one impression of Tehuantepec. It was very calm. I enjoyed that, the energy of whoever the people in that area were. But I went on. I was interacting with people when I was off the road, and I got an invitation to go to Mixtec country, suburbs of Oaxaca, probably, and they said they could find me a job even. And I almost did it, but my visa was expired. And I thought, no, I really better head for the border like that old-timer suggested. So I kept going. When I got to Oaxaca, I don't remember what ride that was, but I'm on the south end of town, and I need to be on the north end of town. And it's a universal hitchhiking principle that when you come into a city and you're going out the other side, it's really wise to take public transport across the city if you can. And it's a little harder in the States because the public transport isn't as frequent as it could be. But I managed to find the right bus, and I got a picture of Oaxaca the way you watch a slideshow, one vignette after another, and that's a really interesting town. I liked it quite well, and of course what I saw of it was what was out the bus window. Anyway, I got to the north end and continued hitchhiking, and I ended up at nightfall on the freeway into Mexico City. And I got situated as best I could, and the first thing that happened is my tent rolled off of my pack and rolled down a very steep incline. And it was worn out anyway, so there was no sense in retrieving it, because I was out of the zone where you need insulation because of the other life streams that are around you. You know, there's when there's scorpions and snakes and spiders about, it's better to have an insulated space. But I didn't need it in the north of Mexico. What I needed at dusk was a ride, not knowing what I was going to do in Mexico City once I got there. And again, a minor miracle, but these tend to keep happening. I was picked up by a physicist, and we talked physics for a little while. His English was quite good. And he invited me to his home. So I stayed with them for a few days. Him and his wife, who was also a physicist, and their young child, and had a really good interaction with him. Though I committed some kind of a gaffe towards the end of my stay, and I never have understood exactly what I did, but it was something that they didn't like, and so they decided it was time for me to be on my way, which of course it was. And I got a ride into the into the Mexico City train station from him, and they gave me the change jar that they had collected, change for bills. So I had enough train fare to get from Mexico City to San Miguel Allende, which I had heard about previously. There's a lot of American expats there. So I got that train trip out of Mexico City, and proceeded to sleep in the park in San Miguel Allende. It was no big deal. The contrast between San Miguel Allende, which is a beautiful small town with a fairly slow pace. I didn't interact much with the American expats. They were all party people, and I wasn't into parties. I was into getting to the border. I enjoyed that town. I think I was there a day or two. But looking back at Mexico City from there, it was really incredible. And I didn't see much of it. I should have gone to the Anthropological Museum. But I stayed mostly in the apartment of my new friends. The man of the house did take me on a tour of the suburb of Mexico City that we were in, and so covered some ground that way. And what I saw was ordinary, rather poor houses. We came to a boundary, and he wanted to make sure I saw that. There was, beyond the boundary, a huge slum, with makeshift tarps and whatnot. And it went on quite a ways, and he wanted to make sure that I understood that that was the seamy side of Mexico City. And he was a bit of a Marxist, so he had that view of the underclass of people, that they need to be raised up, which to me is a sensible view, even though I can't go along with Marxist philosophy, it being non-spiritual in the extreme sometimes. Okay, so I'm in Mexico City, and the next day my friend gave me a ride to the train station, and I remember it was the middle of the night. I remember that there was a nice middle-class lady crashed out on the hard linoleum and sleeping very comfortably. And again, there's something about the adjustment that the body can do. It wasn't a problem. So I crashed out on the linoleum until the train started running about dawn, and found the train to San Miguel Allende. From there, I had to hitchhike again. So when I hitchhiked out of San Miguel Allende, I ended up in Zacatecas, in the state of Zacatecas. And strangely enough, in memory, as I was thinking about this adventure, in my memory, Zacatecas came before Mexico City. When I got there, it was pretty late in the evening, and again, I had nowhere to go. I went into the bus station, I think it was, or train station. No, it was a bus station, to see if there was a convenient bus happening. And in my space was a immigration officer. And I spotted him, even though I had not seen the standard immigration officer costume. And he picked up on me picking up on him, so he approached me. And, of course, I didn't have the proper papers, since my visa was expired. But he didn't ask for papers. He sized me up, and we interacted a bit. And then he said, "Why aren't you afraid of me?" And I said, "Because I have done injury to no person." And that satisfied him. So then he loosened up the inspection. And I said, "Okay, I'm going to go away now. But if you want to talk further, I'll be here at 8 p.m. Right here." And so then I went away. And went down to a little square off the main thoroughfare, and I'm standing there using my survival sense. What are my odds? What should I do next? And there were some kids, some teenagers or young adults passing around a quart of beer. And they motioned me over there, and, "You want a sip?" "Sure, thank you very much." And so I had a slug of the beer, and it continued to pass around, and I introduced myself, and they said, "We have a place for you to sleep." So I was ready. I got my deal together. I did go back to the train station at 8 p.m., and the immigration officer was no longer there. I mean, they didn't care. They didn't even check my papers. They just knew I was not exactly in the normal range of turistas. So these particular kids, to get to the place to rest, we had to climb up a drain pipe. We were in an abandoned bull ring. And these kids, with the knowledge of the caretaker, had strung up a carpet over the entranceway to one of the toreador quarters, and had promptly set up camp in there. And there were about 6 to 8 drunks and 1 glue sniffer that were in the group. And they had welcomed me, and I had a good time. We partied. I ran around Zacatecas during the day and found various interesting things to do. And I think one of the kids that I was with introduced me to a circle of old men that were sitting around. And these old men were passing cups of Kool-Aid laced with cane liquor, which is a lot cheaper than beer in Mexico. I used to drink cane liquor. Anyway, they were slowly getting drunk. And again, I was the odd man in that circle. And they said, "Okay, it's your turn to buy food." So I go to the store, and I buy a large can of horse mackerel and the 2 or 3 biscuits that they have left in the store, and bring them back to the circle, and they open it, and everybody gets a share. I get an equal share to what everybody else got, which was quite satisfactory. A little a crust of bread and a piece of horse mackerel. It's like tuna fish. Then they wanted to, some younger men came along and they wanted to check my passport to see if I was bullshitting him or I really was an American. And so I showed him my passport, and that satisfied him that I wasn't working for the man, so to speak. I'm really grateful that I had that interaction because, again, it was part of my introduction to the real Mexico. And those elders, in fact, were making choices for the kids, and the kids bought it. And it's a beautiful system because the elders were wise enough to make good decisions. And that was a little piece of the way it used to be in the older days. Whether it's still that way in Zacatecas, I have no idea. Anyway, after 3 days or so, they were drinking me under the table. You know, I still had a fairly good capacity for alcohol, but the amount they were consuming, that was ridiculous. And so I finally realized I can't stay here. You know, I'll go right down the tubes. So I picked up one morning and said my goodbyes, and I still think fondly of that little circle of people, and went on my way, and I started hitchhiking out of town. Who should pick me up but the sheriff from Durango? And we get to talking, and I didn't even remember what we were talking about, but we had a good conversation, and we got to the border of Durango, and he says, okay, I'm working now. This is my state. And he lifts up the newspaper between us, and there's a gun under there. And again, this way of expressing in a definite way, he stuffed the gun into his belt and said, I'm working now. And we went along the highway, and then there was an old adobe building. It looked like a Pony Express stop or something. And we stopped there and says, working now, and we get out and we go around the building and make sure there's no negative time energy or whatever the purpose of that was. But I was impressed. And then we get back in the car and we get to Durango, the town, and he buys me breakfast. And, you know, the jump from outlaws to law took place with the extension of a thumb. It was amazing. It was like being in a sociological elevator, up and down and up and down. I got picked up one time by Mexican hippies, and they were definitely an endangered species in Mexico. You know, they were extremely wary about everything, but you know, the way I was a hitchhiker with a backpack, you know, I was obviously not going to be part of the system. So they did pick me up, and we went a ways. I remember being at the gas station for some reason. There were 2 or 3 of them, I guess. And what astounded me, I got turned on to Michoacan folk music. I haven't been able to score a CD of that any time yet. And the thing that they were playing the most for music was Mississippi Delta blues. And they were using those rhythms, and they coped quite well with the strange configurations of Mexican society. Another time I got picked up by a Christian from Maranatha, I think it was, a distinct group in Mexico. And he gave me the standard Witnessing for Christ rap, so that I had the basics of Christian theology. And I understood every word of it, partly because I'd heard the rap before, so I could fit what he was saying in with what I knew about evangelical Christianity. And again, another time a truck driver, which is not too unusual either. I got a lot of truck rides. And that particular truck driver was really jovial. You know, he was just a happy person. So I gradually made my way to Juarez, which in 1981 was a lot safer than it is now. And walked across the border into El Paso. And of course I had to meet the customs man at the gate. And this guy was very friendly and started this conversation. He had worked for the United Fruit Company. So he was well acquainted with the tropics. And so we're having this nice conversation, and he's, in the meantime, picking my pack apart, taking every bit of content out of there and examining it. So when he was examining things and came to that pine needle-like herb that I had a plastic sack of, this was something I had acquired in Palenque. I had caught a skin disease of some sort, and went down to the town, found the local curandero who was selling herbs, and showed him my condition, and he gave me that pine needle-like herb, and says, boil it for 20 minutes and use it después el baño, after taking the bath. So I went back to my camp, bathed in the collapsed Mayan aqueduct from centuries before, made a nice little pool there, and washed, and then applied the boiled herb to my body. It healed up the next day. I was astounded. But I kept that herb. I don't remember the name of it. But the customs man knew the name of it. And he named it in Latin. And I don't know if he knew the use of it. But anyway, then he told me, well, you've obviously been off the beaten path. You really ought to write this up. And I did. I didn't bring my writing. It mainly tells the same tale as I'm telling here. So we continued to have an interesting conversation, and he continued to take everything out of the pack. And he got the last item out, set the pack down, and said, okay, you're good to go, and walked off. So I spent considerable time repacking all the little things that you carry when you're camping out. And then went on my way, and of course I was in El Paso. I couldn't have had more than $3 in pesos. And what I did is I went to Geronimo's well in Truth and Consequences, Mexico, and filled my canteen at Geronimo's well, which mirrors the time in Coba when I filled my canteen from that well. And then went on my way, but that is another tale for another day. So there we have in 3 parts a Mexican adventure. Enough said. Thank you.